Families dead, all slain in an act of familicide-suicide. The only evidence that ties the crimes together are a series of letters left by someone with the moniker LONGLEGS. If you're interested in horror or movies in general, you've probably seen the promos for Longlegs. There was a lot of mystery surrounding the contents of the movie, specifically Nicolas Cage's face reveal. I, and many others, found the marketing terrifying and promising all the same. Too many horror movies end up revealing too much in the trailer, which creates a feeling of underwhelm if you even bother to see it in the cinema. A huge aspect of horror is the fear of the unknown. Imagine floating in the open ocean, your legs kicking in water that stretches so far below you that it turns a murky blue. You cannot see the bottom. Jaws was a phenomenon. An unintended side effect, or Jaws effect, at the time was a mass hysteria surrounding sharks. But in all actuality, shark attacks are very rare. Sharks don't even prefer people as meals. Knowing that sharks are essentially the puppies of the ocean, that actually helps a lot. People go cage diving all the time, playing the gamble that the sharks aren't curious enough to try to take a bite. The likelihood is in their favor, but it's the unknown that makes it scary. And yet, I imagine being there in the open ocean, kicking my feet and trying to keep my head above the water, the ocean floor stretching far below me and not knowing what's around, what can see that I bob there helpless. To me, that's a lot scarier than having the boat at my back and being able to track the shark with my eyes. Horror movies sit in a tricky spot. You want to reveal enough to entice your target demographic. However, revealing too much information takes the fear out of the experience. Alien was scary, terrifying, especially at the time, but by the time of Alien Covenant, I had seen the xenomorph countless times, parodied and played straight.
Oh no, not again.
I know its anatomy, its forms, and the phallic symbolism, and I, as a viewer, am bored. Longlegs gave us a simple premise with the promos and left us with questions. An FBI agent is on the case of a serial killer, starring Nick Cage, but he does not reveal himself in a single promo. You'll have to come to the theater to see his face. Brilliant. I was really excited for this movie. I love Nick Cage, definitely not in the way that made sense to cast him in this, but I think he's wonderful in every role, even if camp. But I was also very skeptical because Nick Cage, enough said.
Timbo Parker, armed robber, arsonist, dope fiend. Well, I'm a hell of a nice guy, just got caught.
Oh, shucks.
But I was pleasantly surprised. I would say he was one of the best things about this movie, but Longlegs unfortunately was a letdown. Apparently the story behind the character of Longlegs is that he's a wannabe rocker, hence the Lou Reed and T-Rex quotes, posters, and the overkill of plastic surgery. Oh yeah, and the singing. That understated characterization was another thing I did adore about this movie. Longlegs was very avoidant of holding your hand through certain information. This worked great in the first 2/3 of the movie, but then by the last third they seemed to give up on this strategy. But I'll come back to that. The cinematography was stunning. Wide static shots, off-center placing of the camera with wide empty space behind the main characters builds a sense of unease, and there is heavy use of that in this film. You know the classic horror movie shot of a character facing towards the camera in the corner of the shot while a hallway sits dark just behind them. Chilling. It had beautiful shots, but unfortunately Longlegs seems to have the opposite problem that a lot of horror movies have. The horror genre is plagued by fake-out jump scares. The main character creeping through the kitchen in the middle of the night because she's heard a noise and turns the corner and cue the sharp crash of violins, but oh, it's just the cat. It works great for getting a jump out of the audience because silence and then sudden loud noise, results in a physical reaction of alarm. The problem with this strategy is that it's not real fear. It's a biological reaction followed by immediate relief and desensitization to the subject material before you. By the time the climax of the movie rolls around, I've already had several fake-out jump scares and lost any tension that might have built up until now, leaving me burnt out on your movie and your monster. My main issue with Longlegs is the movie's build to an unsatisfactory climax. The off-center shots were beautiful and great for building tension, but it never ended up leading anywhere. I'm not saying there needed to be someone standing in the hallway. What I am saying is that if you're going to build a bridge, you might as well build it to somewhere. Hereditary is a fantastic example. It's one of my favorite horror movies, and it's nothing like a classic satanic movie you'd see in the theaters. It's one hell of a slow burn, and by God does the last half hour of that movie reward you for being such a patient little viewer. Longlegs set up a lot, and did not deliver. It marketed itself as a puzzle. There are codes to break, dots to connect, but most of it is a red herring. And then the answers are handed to us in the form of an impromptu narrated exposition montage in the last act. Are you kidding? The first 2/3 of this movie seemed so well thought out. Longlegs relied heavily on being realistic and grim. It's somber and slow. The problem when relying on realism is that if I am expected to take your movie seriously, goofier concepts come under greater scrutiny. The main character revealing herself to be a psychic was certainly a surprise, but not unwelcome. I'm willing to accept the devil-worshipping angle. What I am not willing to accept is a man making life-size dolls with a magic ball in their head to be delivered by a woman masquerading as a nun to houses with 9-year-old daughters who were born on the 14th of any given month so that the dolls can possess the fathers of the house and convince him to commit oh my fucking god. So that the dolls can possess the fathers of the house and convince him to commit familicide as a sacrifice to the devil. A little convoluted, bro. Longlegs ended up being a shallow experience. Don't get me wrong, the tension build, the use of puzzles, and mainly the promos were amazing, albeit the plot was overloaded with turns and theoretically detailed concepts. It was just an obvious attempt to seem deeper than it succeeded in doing. The movie's jam-packed with red herrings in an obvious attempt to deter us. Nicolas Cage was woefully underutilized. The resolution of Longlegs as a character is solved before the last act even, but emotionally felt like it should have been the climax the movie was building towards. The parts he was in were great, even if I couldn't distance myself from it being Nick Cage I was staring at. Because the promos hyped up his face reveal so heavily, I expected something a lot more confronting than what I was given. His actual focused face reveal was a goofy convenience store encounter that I found to be disappointing. My classmates liked it, to each their own, whatever. That being said, I did adore his character and the scenes he was in. The satanic narrative implied that he needed to die. When police find him, he has suitcases, but he does not run. He seems expectant and excited to see Lee, and then he kills himself. I originally believed this was somehow to complete the sacrifice pattern, even if this doesn't end up making sense. But then his other victim kills herself while in the psychiatric unit, completing the ritual that way. So given the context and careful planning of everything up until now, his death seemed more convenience sake for wrapping up the plot than it felt true to the narrative of Longlegs. I expected Longlegs to be a lot more fucked up. I'm not saying certain horrific things should have happened to the characters, but I am saying that considering the opening quote of T-Rex lyrics, Longlegs' continuous reference to violence, and the devil-worshipping premise, I am pretty let down. The Amityville horror premise feels basic. It's horrible, and probably could be done in a new and terrifying way, but attached to the silly inclusion of a magic doll, I feel as though Longlegs started as Silence of the Lambs, and then I accidentally sat on the remote midway through and it turned to a generic Netflix horror movie. It really feels like the director played this movie safe. Longlegs wrote a couple of scary letters and then behaved in a creepy manner towards young girls, but ultimately we never see a manifestation of his cruelty. He gets the nun and the doll to do his bidding. Initially, I believed he was manipulating the daughters into helping him, which is how he found his way inside the house, why there was no evidence of him except his letters, why the survivor in the hospital seemed almost possessed by his presence, and a key red herring. There's a 911 call in the beginning where the father of a victimized family says, "That's not my daughter," before killing his family. It's clearly a red herring, and the writers probably hoped the audience, when rewatching, would chalk it up to him having been referring to the doll, but it's obvious what it actually was. And then, despite the writing leading us to believe that everything is a puzzle, everything is connected, something needs to be decoded even if we, the audience, aren't allowed to decode it ourselves. The explanation of the story is handed to us by way of a narrated exposition sequence. What was a story that urged you to sit at the edge of your seat and to pay attention wrapped itself up in a lackluster sequence narrated by a character we hardly got any screen time from while the main character slept. The mother was another red herring. In the beginning of the movie, the main character Lee calls her mother, and from the distance the mother gives us, it seems as though Lee is the clingy one and the mother may be emotionally neglectful. The mother asks Lee to pray, and when we meet her mother face to face, it seems that she's a hoarder, barely holding on to her sanity, but she abandons religion as soon as Lee admits to not saying her prayers. But through exposition we are told the opposite of what her character presents. She cares for Lee so much that she sold her soul to the devil. She cares for Lee so much that she's willing to murder countless families. A movie that relies so much on us taking it seriously, of coming off as realistic, the final confrontation is a possession scene. I'm sure it could be done in a way I wouldn't find goofy, but the mother sits in a nun costume and watches while everyone except Lee gives a corny performance. And Lee watches and does nothing for enough time for the audience to get an unsatisfactory climax despite her knowing what was to come and having ample opportunity to do something to prevent it. I'm left wanting. The movie put so much effort into stylistic choices and a vague premise that when it had to deliver, it fumbled and fell to the cliche. A bridge to nowhere. Disappointing. Look at me talking like I'm that fucking expert.